Hello, I'm Lucas Taggart Atkinson, maintainer of Rollup.js. Today I want to give you a brief overview over the major new features released at Rollup in the last year and what we're working on at the moment. First, of course, I want to tell you about the state of the Rust migration. So last year we started introducing a small core of native code that was designed to replace the parsing API and eventually replace more parts of Rollup to finally make it faster. So what did we achieve so far? 20% faster bundling speed without plugins, that is to say, which I think is significant. This is not lightning fast, but it's a little faster, and 5% reduced memory consumption. But of course, we do not want to stop here, so the biggest improvements are definitely yet to come. So what are the next steps here? So first, we want to move the cache to binary format. This will come very soon. If you're wondering, Rollup does have a cache. It's just not active by default. You have to use it via a Rollup configuration. We also want to improve that. So moving the cache to a binary format will allow Rollup to completely skip the parsing step because in the future we can basically just operate on the binary format. Then second, and this is really interesting, we're introducing a new parsing API for plugins, or more specifically, a parsing and syntax tree walking API, because those two actually need to go together. A plugin usually doesn't want to look at the entire syntax tree of a file. The plugin may be interested just in function declarations or in imports. So the new API that we are currently finalizing will allow a plugin to specify specifically which nodes they're interested in. And then the parsing will happen asynchronously in another thread. And then the syntax tree nodes are actually generated lazily as the plugin accesses them. So they will still be able to start walking from a function declaration down to the children, but to speed things up and basically make this really instantaneous, the actual JavaScript objects will only be generated as they're accessed. So keep your eyes peeled for this one. There has already been interested from the Dino people in this API, so let's see if we can get some cooperation going here eventually. And the last thing that we really want to do is migrate the tree shaking. The tree shaking process, the single slowest step we still have in our pipeline, but it's also really complicated to migrate. We have plans for many of the problems we are facing, but expect this to take at least a year until it will be done, but the impact will definitely be massive. So that being said, let's talk about tree shaking. So there have actually been some interesting tree shaking improvements in the last year. Specifically this one, Rollup is now tracking function arguments. So let's assume we have, for instance, this function. It's a function that basically fetches from a target, but it also logs if a certain config value is passed. So in the past, basically this would just be bundled as it was. But as you can see, we are calling the function exactly once and we're saying don't log. So starting with Rollup 4.16, Rollup will know that and it will just optimize the if statement away. And as you can see, it also optimizes the parameter away. So this was for functions that are only called once. If you're calling a function multiple times, then like this, then it cannot be optimized. Why? Because here in this example, we basically would have needed an algorithm that really compares two totally unrelated objects, and this can potentially be expensive. However, if you do it slightly differently, like extract a variable, then Rollup will again see this is the same variable, and it will again optimize. And last, it will also optimize a function call if we are using primitive values. So I think this is a really big improvement. This is already live for some time, and it was based on an external contribution. Thank you very much. The second thing that is not live yet, but it's in the final stages of preparation, is improved tree shaking for dynamic imports. So we already had tree shaking for dynamic imports, but for instance, look at this example. We are dynamically importing module, and then later we are only ever accessing the foo export and not the bar export. Currently, Rollup cannot optimize this, but with the new improvements coming, Rollup will see that the bar property is never accessed, and then it can be optimized away. But you may ask, okay, if I really can track property accesses, can't I do even more cool stuff with this? And yes, of course you can. So this will not be the only feature coming. What will also come is that, for instance, this function is called with an object, but it only ever looks at one of the properties. And Rollup will then be able to see that. And as you can see here, the other property is just optimized away. I call this tree shaking for object properties. We are still making the sound and see that basically we catch every edge case, but I'm pretty confident that this will be finally released sometime this year. Um, Again, also thanks to a contribution that was not from me, but from Chicky Pie, who is also now maintainer and doing a lot of great work at Rollup. And last, I want to talk about new syntax we support. So first, Rollup supports now explicit resource management. So this is basically the using keyword. This is just syntax support. We are not transpiling this. But if, for instance, you're writing a plugin and using Rollup to bundle this, this may be interesting. Of course, with full tree shaking support and side effect detection, at least to a certain degree. So I think we shouldn't mess up here. The second feature is decorators. So for instance, in this example, we're using a decorator to replace a function with another version of the function that logs when the promise returns. Again, this is only syntax support, no transpilation. But there is something really interesting that I actually want to talk about, and this is JSX support. So imagine you have this React component, so kind of hello world component. What Rollup will be able to do, which is also in the stages of finalization, is that you have a new property JSX and it has a mode property. If you set the mode to classic, it will do a classic React transformation, meaning it will replace it with a React create element call like this. Also, you have the automatic mode, which supports the new React transform, which is supposed to be faster, using a JSX or JSXS function, moving the children into a separate property and extracting the key property. But, and this is the most important one and the most I'm most proud about, this one, which looks like nothing is happening. But of course, this is not the case. So what this allows you is basically to bundle JSX to other JSX using tree shaking to remove unused components, as well as deconflicting. So if component names are conflicting, then the names will basically receive suffixes, so no conflict appears. This is really interesting for bundling libraries. And there is actually a reason. You might wonder, Rollup didn't support non-JavaScript syntax in the past. What has changed? First of all, this use case is important in the wild. People are using Acon plugins for this and special plugins to fake the tree shaking, but they have the edge cases that do not work well. The second is that it's no longer possible now to do the syntax extension via plugins. So we are basically breaking this use case for libraries. This was the main motivating factor, but of course there are also some upsides to supporting JSX natively. And one thing is it is already supported by the parser, so we only need to think about the transpilation and the deconflicting and tree shaking logic. And secondly, it will be a big performance improvement over using a plugin to do that. Now, if we're starting with JSX, are we going to stop here? Maybe, but actually, we could also go this step. So I don't want to make any promises here, but there is already a branch where I started looking at supporting TypeScript natively. This is also a big thing that can take a year. So no promises on any timeline here. But if we manage to pull this off, it will make using TypeScript and Rollup so much faster and so much smoother. So let's see where we're going. And that was all I wanted to tell you today. Thank you for tuning in and have a great WeetConf.